How can you manage a property refurbishment, or how should you manage a property refurbishment? That's today's question of the day that we've been asked from a client, and there's a couple of key things to consider. Honestly, I think it's something that's always kind of changing. We're still figuring it out now in the projects that we run. You feel like you've got the perfect team or the perfect trades, and then something kind of slips. They get busy, or the project kind of overruns, trades then kind of diaries clash, and it becomes a little bit of a balancing act to try and make sure everything kind of gets over the line smoothly, if it were. So there's no perfect method, I would say, or certainly that we've found, that's going to mean that you sleep soundly at night. There's absolutely no problems with a refurbishment. There are always things that kind of come up, but hopefully there's a couple of things that I can give you as an insight, which will cover off key things that really help us now kind of structure and make sure the refurbishments we're doing go as swimmingly as possible. The first thing is communication. So without a doubt, communication is absolute paramount. If you're starting off a refurbishment or a conversation with the build team prior to your refurbishment, and they are slow in getting back, they're slow to email, or there's just kind of a very lack of effort in their response, I would be concerned about that personally. That's never performed well for us ongoing in terms of the refurbs that we've done. We've always experienced issues when there's been a problem, let's say, prior to the refurb starting with communication. It's usually indicative of the contact or the refurbishment team or the trades being just too busy, too overwhelmed, and then them starting your refurbishment is unlikely to kind of change in that situation. So personally, communication we see is absolutely paramount. Making sure that you have a good relationship, making sure you have good contact and lines of communication open with your development team is very important. Second thing is planning, making sure that you have all of the agreements in place, making sure you have any particular kind of Gantt chart or schedule of works, time frame, something lined up that says exactly what's going to happen and when, because then you can refer back to that whenever you need to, not just in conversations with your trades and your refurbishment team, but also your own planning. If you're planning on selling that property or renting that property, you're going to need a bit of a timeline as to when things are going to be likely to be done. So when can you start the marketing? When can you start the furnishing if you're going to need to kind of furnish it? And if you're winging it and you don't know what these kind of dates are, it's so easy for it to kind of overrun, and extra couple of days can then lead into an extra couple of weeks very easily without you kind of noticing. And also the knock-on effect and the impact from not having a scheduled and structured kind of diary in terms of when things are happening easily means you miss kind of trade dates. So if you need particular things to happen in line for maybe a joiner needs to kind of come in on a certain date after a previous trade has been finished, well, if you miss that date from the previous trade, your joiner might be busy for the next week or 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden you've got a difficulty when it comes to the knock-on impact with that. So making sure you have all of the agreements in place so everybody knows clearly what is being done, who's doing what, and a timeline of when things are kind of happening is very important. Third thing I'd kind of personally recommend is using a whole of service refurbishment team rather than individual trades. There are values to have by using individual trades. It gives you much more control over those kind of conversations and relationships if you needed that. Usually can have a bit more of an impact in terms of saying I specifically need this or want this done in this particular way or this particular material to be used. It's easier in that respect because you have direct communication with those individuals. The downside to that is there's extensive project management required, juggling diaries, making sure each individual trade is aware of what's happening, maybe organising kind of materials, and kind of not just the materials in terms of the specific kind of maybe bath or shower or kitchen that you want, but also sometimes the minor items, the day-to-day kind of usability items that the trades are going to be kind of needing in order to do their role. If you're project managing, they might be reliant upon you to get that, so they can stay on site rather than nipping out to the shops all the time to try and get minor items. Whereas if you've got a project management, a whole of kind of service refurbishment team, they can run all of that project for you. Now there is a cost to that, of course. That's going to cost you a little bit more in terms of the refurbishment total, and very often they cover their fees by having profit and project management kind of layered into that. So there is a consideration for cost, but personally I found it easier when we're using a whole of service type refurbishment team. So there's the kind of recommendations I'd give when it comes to kind of managing refurbishments. Just something that hopefully keeps your refurbishments ticking over if you are looking at developing buy-to-let properties, even if it's just something relatively straightforward, or even maybe more extensive if you're doing any apartment conversions, title splits, or if you're looking at converting a residential house to a HMO or anything kind of grander. these kind of couple of tips will hopefully help keep you on track to make sure you're finding the right kind of contacts. And then the final thing I would recommend as well, just something that we've kind of noticed on some of our latest projects, is where possible, go on recommendation. We've used lots of different services online before, we've used lots of different sites before to try and find that initial contact. If you need in a new area, that's fair enough. But if you can, recommendations have been gold dust for us when it comes to kind of refurbishments, because it's just easier to find the right refurbishment team, the right individual trades if you need to pull somebody on specifically to do kind of a role. If you know somebody that's used them before, that's great. And if you don't have any contacts in a local area, just go into like a local networking event, a local property networking event, and just asking the contacts there who they use for their trades or for their refurbishments will just give you a bit of a head start in making sure you've hopefully got that right team for your next buy-to-let project. Hope that helps. And any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Catch you soon. Bye.